Hello everyone. I had lost hope because of my son's autism. Here is what changed my perspective. Hello everyone. So in this video I will quickly go over my son's story. He is now 9 years old and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. And I will quickly explain the therapeutic wandering I faced over the past few years. In other words, I searched for solutions, of course, like all loving parents do, caring towards their children, in an attempt to solve, improve, or fix the brains, so to speak, of their autistic children. So when Alexandre was 3 years old, 3 years old, we started to notice the emergence of autistic symptoms, restricted interests, social withdrawal, no development of language, and eye contact that was not healthy, if I can put it that way, not looking people in the eyes, which is actually typical for all children who are diagnosed ASD. And let's say this set of symptoms hasn't changed much with age. Alexandre has very limited language, answers off topic, there is social withdrawal and an inability to stay focused. For more than 20 minutes, a tendency to cry or laugh for no reason. This is a situation you recognize yourself in, probably, which is typical of children considered autistic. ASD, that is restricted interests, social communication dysfunction, and various language problems. Self-stimulation, stereotypy, let's say all these symptoms that are typical of autistic children. And unfortunately, no one really helped you. You were probably told about ABA to try to work with your child. You were probably encouraged to accept the situation. You were pushed a little towards despair. And as for me, I had been fighting for 6 years. I had never given up. I really wanted to find a solution. I tried many things without success, of course, until I discovered precisely neuromodulation. It's been 3 months since I started implementing it intensively. At first, as a test, I was going very slowly, but I saw absolutely spectacular changes, which had I was almost euphoric seeing the impact. Imagine yourself in a situation where you have a child who is disabled and you start to see them coming out of that disability. It's absolutely revolutionary. And that's why I decided to share this information with you, this feedback, because for me, it would have been immoral not to share it. So Alexandre, after implementing neuromodulation, after the first week, the hypersensitivity completely disappeared. Before, he used to put his hands over his ears. That has completely disappeared. He had tactile hypersensitivity, and that has completely disappeared. The self-stimulation behaviors have almost completely disappeared, by about 80%. His regulation has greatly improved. Most of the stereotypical behaviors have disappeared and the restricted interests are gone. He used to take a slate and write on it. He would write numbers in a row or letters in a row. That has completely disappeared. Now he writes words. He no longer writes numbers or letters in a row. We have a child who looks you in the eyes, who is calm, whose gaze is full, and that is completely different. These are empirical changes that I have observed following the implementation of this intensive neuromodulation. What you need to know is that today, most autism specialists are actually incompetent. You've met psychologists, you've met neurologists, and in 2 minutes, they give you a diagnosis. There you go, it's autism. They saw that the child wasn't making proper eye contact. They saw that he had stereotypies, that he didn't speak properly, that communication was dysfunctional. He's autistic. That's what I've seen on my end with all the psychologists I've met, with the neurologists I've met. There is a serious lack of competence on the subject, which I have experienced myself through my own life. It wasn't until I gave it a try that I discovered neuromodulation, which is a non-invasive intervention that regulates from a functional perspective your child's brain. And when the problem is structured, when your child truly has autism, it won't cure them. Careful, big disclaimer for this video. It won't cure them, but it can greatly improve their condition. According to the literature, what we observe empirically is about a 20 to 30% improvement from a behavioral perspective, which already has a major impact on your quality of life. And that's something ABA will never be able to give you, or let's say superficial behavioral therapies. Because with neuromodulation, you're addressing the neurological root, and that can change everything. And maybe your child, in the event that you decide to implement this kind of strategy, maybe it won't help them much, but at least you won't have the regret of not having tried. And I think that when you have a child growing up with all the suffering that comes with it, the suffering of the family, the suffering of the parents, the suffering possibly of siblings, the suffering of a child who is trapped in autistic functioning, it is almost immoral not to try to improve things, because you have the choice between being worse in a bad situation or having a complete revolutionary change that will bring about a total shift in your child's neurodevelopmental trajectory. Because the literature today for true cases of autism talks about a 20 to 30% improvement, which is already significant. And for children who are falsely diagnosed with autism, and there are many, you can see turnarounds, major transformations, since that means the core of the problem is actually electrophysiological. This was the case for my son. It means we have a problem, an electrophysiological dysfunction of the brain, which neuromodulation will target very precisely. So, if you will, in our family, there was a before and an after. Clearly 6 years of therapeutic wandering, of suffering, of insomnia on my part about what I was going to do with my son. I think you can relate, and as a father, because I'm not a doctor who isn't personally affected, I am very empathetic about this, because my son was diagnosed with autism and I went through all the stages that you have gone through. And today, one of the best decisions of my life that I was able to make was to start this process. Alexandre, after 3 months, is not cured, far from it, but he has already improved significantly, much more than what the literature suggested. At this point, I would say that we have seen about a 50% improvement in 3 months of neuromodulation. The hypersensitivity has disappeared almost completely, about 100%. The self-stimulation and stereotypies have disappeared by about 80%, which is transformative. I can go out with my son, he walks calmly, I take an elevator, and I am not ashamed. I don't have a child who throws tantrums or makes strange movements in front of everyone. I have a child who is calm, who is almost neurotypical from a behavioral point of view, not permanently, but almost permanently, which actually changes everything in our quality of life. And then I regained hope, a hope that changes my life, that changes our life, and above all, that changes my son's life. And that changes everything. And my main regret is not having known about this a few years ago. Now, better late than never. Today, Alexandre is 9 years old. His brain is still very plastic, and beyond the electrophysiological improvement I get from it, I have windows of plasticity that reopen and allow me to work with a specialized educator, for example, ABA. Why not in synergy in a much more effective way, since the speed of improvement is multiplied when you combine neuromodulation with behavioral therapy. There you go. I hope this video will be useful to you and that it will provide you with some interesting insights. It is very important for me to share my experience with you because I know how much suffering there is in the world. How many parents in the world suffer with their autistic child? I've been through it myself, and I invite you. If you can't implement neuromodulation, I encourage you to educate yourself, to seek information, to read literature on the subject, because there is very likely a major opportunity. I say very likely, not with certainty. I say there is very likely a major opportunity to be seized for your child. I wish you the best of luck in helping your child improve.